Welcome to Washington. I'm Blake Berman. Pushback from the right. Tonight here on the Hill, why some of President Trump's biggest supporters in the Senate are now questioning if his agenda is indeed, quote unquote, beautiful. And how about looking back at the left? Biden-era investigations now in focus. Why the president's FBI is ramping up unsolved cases like a Supreme Court leak. And remember that cocaine that was found in the White House? Also tonight, here on the Hill, the presidential spat. President Trump says Vladimir Putin has gone crazy. Putin says Trump is emotional. And look who else we heard from today. Did King Charles just really try to send a message of his own?
Many Canadians are feeling anxious and worried about the drastically changing world around them. I've always had the greatest admiration for Canada's unique identity.
But first tonight, here from the Hill, the latest chapter in Trump versus Harvard. Hello, good evening. Thanks for being with us. I am Blake Berman. This is the Hill on NewsNation. We begin with that new order tonight involving canceled contracts, as President Trump also suggests he could redirect billions of dollars from Harvard to trade schools. We begin this evening live on the North Lawn with our Kelly Meyer, live once again over at the White House. Kelly?
Yeah, this saga with the school continues between Harvard and President Trump. He's hitting back at Harvard yet again, moving to terminate all remaining federal contracts with the university and threatening to give billions in grant money to trade schools. So this is the letter obtained by NewsNation that was sent to federal agencies late this morning. And then in a new social media post today, he pushed to redirect $3 billion in research grant funding and giving it to trade schools. And then this tonight, a rare statement from a spokesman for First Lady Melania Trump telling NewsNation Barron did not apply to Harvard, and any assertion that he or that anyone on his behalf applied is completely false. That is response to this viral conspiracy theory that Trump is taking aim at Harvard because his son Barron didn't get in. Blake.
And Kelly, there is some news coming out of the White House at this moment involving student visas and appointments in the middle of all of this. What can you tell us? Yeah,
so there's new reporting tonight, Blake, that Secretary of State Marco Rubio signed this cable directing U.S. embassies to temporarily stop scheduling new student visa appointments as the Trump administration works to expand social media screenings for applicants. Today at the State Department, spokesperson Tammy Bruce wouldn't confirm that reporting, saying it has not been discussed publicly, but that is leaked material, and went on to say this.
If you're discussing that, that's something that has not been discussed publicly. It would have to be leaked material if it exists. What I can remind everyone of, which we've discussed for months here, is that we use every tool in our tool chest to vet anyone coming in who wants to come into this country.
And Blake, this could affect thousands of international students planning to study in America. So that's the next thing to watch for here in this saga, Blake.
All right, Kelly Meyer, live tonight, live on the North Lawn. Kelly, thank you. All right, so Harvard has been in a standoff with the federal government for more than a year now. This all became a part of the national conversation early in 2024. I want to walk you through what's taken place from then until now, because you remember then there were the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protesters that took over parts of Harvard's campus last year in 2024. Some of them even protesting, chanting, quote, "from the river to the sea." That is a call, really, for the elimination of Israel. Harvard's then president, Claudine Gay, remember this moment up on Capitol Hill as well? She testified along with the presidents of MIT and the University of Pennsylvania. Those schools also had similar protests on their campus. They were then widely criticized for their testimonies in response to anti-Semitism. Gay later resigned as a result of that performance and the university's response. So then fast forward to really the initial days there of the Trump administration in early 2025. Just a couple days in, President Trump signed an executive order taking additional measures to combat anti-Semitism, especially on the campuses of higher education. Now, his actions against Harvard widened by freezing federal funds and research grants, billions of dollars worth, and banning, or at least trying to at this point in time, international students. Harvard's new president, this man right here, Alan Garber, he's standing firm. He is refusing to comply with President Trump's demands to make certain changes on that campus that Harvard feels has gone too far.
What is perplexing is the measures that they have taken to address these that don't even hit the same people that they believe are causing the problems. Why cut off research funding? It's hard to see the link between that and, say, anti-Semitism.
Joining me now here on the Hill, look who's back with us, the professor, Lauren Wright, Princeton University's associate research scholar and lecturer, NewsNation political contributor as well. Chris Cillizza, I am, as always, happy to see you, but Lauren's been gone for a little while. Welcome back, sir. He is a NewsNation contributor. And Lindsey Granger back with us here on the Hill once again. Lindsey as well, NewsNation contributor. All right, so here's what I just had a pollster tell me, okay? They said, look, when Trump frames this as anti-Semitism happened on campus, we need to take action. When you bring up the question of, really? Harvard gets how much in federal money? And then when you start to ask the question, really? How many seats of American students are not being used because of international students taking those seats? That pollster told me, Lauren, that is a 65-35 issue for Trump when it is framed that way, Lauren.
It makes a lot of sense. We often forget in academia that most Americans are not college educated. And then they see these images of students destroying buildings, holding janitors hostage, vandalizing, saying crazy things, and by the way, asking for their student loans to be forgiven by taxpayers. And most people look at that and think, why is this school getting taxpayer funds at all? They don't make the connection to the research.
You also think that the president you also think the president, Lauren, runs the risk of moving too far on this?
Well, yes, because eventually medical research, national security research, all the scientific research that should be the core of what universities communicate to the public that they do is going to suffer. And the ironic part about this trade school bit that you introduced, Blake, is the only other vendors, as Trump calls them, that could complete that research are other elite universities or other university government institutions, rather, that are also being gutted or facing funding cuts.
That pollster also said to me, Lindsey, when it is framed as a subsidy, Democrats lose. But when they frame it as, okay, this is world-class government research, that's the line that Democrats should be taking, but they're not at this point in time.
Right, because we have to remember we're recruiting the best and the brightest. No matter what country they come from, they're going to Harvard and hopefully having the education that ends up as our leaders around the world in business and in many industries. And I think when we cut America's college systems and start to do it over this woke agenda that some people like and some people don't like, then we create a problem where we're not honoring the freedom of speech that belongs in college. There's 25,000 kids in Harvard. Of course, there are going to be people that dissent. Of course, there are going to be people that disagree. But we can't shut that off because they disagree with President Trump. That's against everything that Harvard and the U.S.
What would you say, though, when I think one of the things that people have learned in all this is they say 1 in every 4 students there is international? And they look at it, 6,700 currently enrolled, 27% of total enrollment. Some folks might look at that and say, wait a minute, how did it get to that point?
Well, if an international person is the person finding out what the next steps in AI are, if the international person is the person finding out cancer research that saves American lives, is it not as valuable? And so that's the argument when you recruit the best and the brightest from other countries. It's, why we would recruit international students. And America is built on a variety of diverse ideas and opinions. And so having the best and brightest from other countries has never been a bad thing and shouldn't be framed as that.
Cillizza, where's Trump taking this?
Well, look, politically, it's, as the professor noted, it's not a bad issue for him at all. I think most people are unaware that Harvard got any federal money. They know Harvard's really well funded, but they assume it's because they have a massive endowment, not because the federal government gives them money. So I don't think it's a bad thing to go after sort of politically. In fact, I think it's a good thing for him to go after sort of like wokeness and why are we giving these people the money. What I would say, though, is dig a little bit below the surface. I don't know that the public will, but dig a little bit below the surface, and I think you start to see, like, it sounds great to take the $3 billion that the federal government gives to Harvard and give it to trade schools, but what would they do? Like, you wouldn't replace a collider, these huge projects that the government and these huge academic institutions are putting together. You can't just replace that, right? I mean, that's the issue.
You really think that the trade school idea would backfire on him? I'm looking at trade school enrollment. 2019, 5 years ago, was at about 900,000. It's at 1.1 million now, so it's an upward trend.
I think the trade school idea is a good one. I simply think the idea that you can take the money, what the money is being spent on at Harvard, okay, just as an example, and port that over and get the same research at a trade school is extremely unlikely to happen. Does that mean a trade school wouldn't benefit from building? Of course it would. And I think that's a good thing. I just think, and the professor makes this point, at some level, there's going to be like, okay, well, this was research we were doing that they had built this special machine for only at Princeton or Harvard or wherever, and it would take us a year anywhere else to even do it. It might even cost more money. That's my point. Like, I think something gets lost here. Now, the point, though, politically speaking, yes, supporting anti-wokeness in elite institutions and saying, why are there so many international students and why are we giving these institutions all this money? That's a political winner for Donald Trump. I just am saying there are real world consequences on the research side that I don't think people might care about, but matter.
Yeah, notable Harvard research. I'm looking at smallpox, anesthesia, baking powder, Alzheimer detection test earlier this year as well. Lauren, let me end this with you because you teach it, as you remind me, the #1 university in this nation. What's your when you look at this going forward, what's your worry in the moment and what's your hope in the moment?
Well, my worry is the damage has already been done to universities' reputations. People no longer believe that we're a meritocracy. They don't believe the students deserve to be there. And maybe the quiet physics professor plodding away on a quantum mechanics issue doesn't get media attention, but you better bet a professor willing to say Israelis are complicit in genocide does, or something related to gender studies that's really controversial does. And that's why we've had a problem for a long time, and the chickens are coming home to roost somewhat.
The other side of it, give me the hope from your view as a professor in the Ivies.
That people will see the value of our universities for the empirical research that they do, and even humanities departments that teach students how to write, how to think about civics. These are all things that the American public needs, and we've just done a really bad job communicating the message.
All right, we'll leave it there. Lauren Wright, Chris Cillizza, Lindsey Granger, thank y'all. Appreciate it. Talk to you again soon. Still to come tonight, here on the Hill, the president's big, beautiful bill, now in the hands of the Senate, but not all Republicans are on the same page. How some are now pushing back. Plus, you remember that whole cocaine in the White House episode? Of course you do. How could you forget? Those at the top of the FBI certainly haven't. Why they are now about to re-pursue that case. And two leaders with two very different backgrounds. Why Vladimir Putin and King Charles had Trump on their minds today. Welcome to Washington. I thank you for being with us tonight. I hope you stick around. Other side of the break, The Hill, coming right back in 4 minutes. See you then. Would you take a look at this? What happened on the corner of Wall and Broad today? All three indices up in the green. The Dow surging a little less than 2%. The other two indices, though, slightly above 2%. Markets ripping as the president paused those deep tariffs against the European Union, or at least the possibility of them. But as he carries out his trade agenda, questions tonight up on Capitol Hill, where a showdown over the president's quote-unquote big, beautiful bill is now moved on over into the Senate. Much like in the House, the Senate also has a lot of factions there trying to figure out where they're going to go. Some major sticking points now facing the Senate include the deficit, cuts to Medicaid, and what to do about green energy incentives, leading some to begin drawing lines in the sand, particularly when you're talking about Republicans overspending and the deficit. The Congressional Budget Office, for example, projecting that the bill in its current form would add about $3.8 trillion to the deficit, an additional amount, over the next 10 years. Senate Republicans like Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Rick Scott want more spending cuts, which would almost certainly include cuts to some areas that other Republicans wouldn't want to touch. The other side of the aisle for Republicans, or at least the dilemma, senators like Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Josh Hawley, Jerry Moran, who are warning that Medicaid cuts would end up harming rural hospitals in their states. It's a tough walk there for the leader, John Thune, who can only afford to lose 3 votes in the Senate to get the bill through. Here's what President Trump said over the weekend.
Well, I want the Senate and the senators to change, to make the changes they want, and we'll go back to the House and we'll see if we can get them. In some cases, those changes maybe are something I'd agree with, to be honest. It happens.
With us now here on the Hill, Hogan Gidley, former principal deputy press secretary in the first Trump White House. He is basically the line between the White House and to Republicans up on Capitol Hill. Is that right?
Sure.
You'll take that title.
No, that's fine.
You're one of the lines. You've got the pulse of both sides. Fine. Did you expect that over the weekend? I'm looking at all these Republicans. Ron Johnson called it a joke. Rick Scott, I want to get a deal done. I support the president's agenda, but we got to live in reality here. Rand Paul said that Republicans are losing their moral high ground. Tom Tillis, we got a lot more work to do.
Well, they're going to have their opinions, of course. The House did what it could to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and that's what it's named. So you don't need to put quotes around it, Blake. Okay. That's what it's called officially.
Fair enough.
Listen, I think Mike Johnson did an outstanding job working with Leader Thune in consult with the White House, their staff as well, to come up with a piece of legislation that we think not only just passed the House by 1 vote,
right,
but then can get over the hurdle in the Senate as well. No question the devil's in the details, but these senators have constituents they care about. They want to try and let them know they're fighting for what the people that put them in office want. But how are you going to get the 51 votes to get it over the finish line and send it back to the House? If you change it too much, as you know, then you've got a problem back on the House side.
It's a yo-yo, right?
Yes.
It's like taking one and pulling from the next.
Correct.
So if that's the analogy, I don't know if it's a good or bad one, but what can't you pull too much? Like, what's the big worry here?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's any one big worry per se. These people are
what
out
do you
there.
have your eye on? Let me put it that way.
Look, I think the cuts were a big issue on our side of the aisle as well, over on the House floor. Debates over how much we're actually cutting here, and this is the most significant set of cuts in spending in 30-plus years. So you're putting it in the right direction. This isn't the end-all, be-all. There's still a lot more to do after this bill passes. But still, the Senate's going to have their fight on their side. But as I mentioned, because this has been done so closely tied with the Senate, the House, and the White House, there really shouldn't be too many surprises coming out of the Senate. A few things here and there, but nothing major. How is the role that Donald Trump, that he's going to play going forward? Because in the House, you have all these different members of Congress, right? Maybe he doesn't pick up the phone every single time. But you're talking about 2 or 3 senators here, right? So at the end of the day, when does Trump get involved? How does he get involved? Well, interestingly enough, because the margins are so slim in the House, right, it kind of is a good disinfectant because you get to see the 2 or 3 over there that could be problematic as well. I used to love working in the White House with the president because once he makes a decision, you go. When Mike Johnson makes a decision, he has to socialize it with 217 other people. Okay. The Senate's the same thing. Once they make a decision, they have to get their 50-plus members, 54, whatever it is, on the same page. That's a difficult dance to do, but I do think because they've been so communicative in their individual chambers, they know the problems, they know the pitfalls, they're working to navigate against those. And while you see many people out in front now saying, I want more of this, more of that, I don't know if that's actually going to come to fruition when it comes time to pass the bill, because the president will most assuredly get involved in this process at some point.
So when are we getting the post? Senator fill in the blank doesn't fill in the blank, and he goes after him.
Well, it depends. Okay. If that particular senator doesn't fill in the blank. If the senator's doing what he needs to do to try and get the bill over the finish line, that's one thing. You're always going to get someone like Massey on the House side that says no. Rand Paul is always going to say no as well, because that's who they are.
Give me one senator to watch. Who are you watching the most?
I am watching Ron John. Very popular, very
Ron
strong,
Johnson, Wisconsin.
Full-throated as well. We'll see what he has to say about it when it comes
All right.
to vote.
We'll leave it there. Hogan Gidley, thank you, sir.
Thanks,
Catch you later in the show.
Sure.
Appreciate it. All right, still to come tonight. Here on the Hill, what's old is new again, I guess you could say, is the FBI reopens cases from the Biden era. Remember that whole cocaine in the White House incident? The Trump FBI is now taking another look at that. Tracy Walder, Jesse Weber, other side of the break. And is the third time the charm after 2 fiery explosions. SpaceX will attempt to launch its Starship rocket later this evening. The Hill, back in a few. All right, welcome back here to the Hill on News Nation. Almost 6:30 here on the East Coast and in Washington. The FBI is now reopening 3 recent unsolved cases of what the Deputy Director Dan Bongino is calling, quote, potential public corruption, end quote, during the Biden administration. Now, the 3 cases are, you remember it, the cocaine that was found in the White House in the West Wing there in 2023. In 2022, the big Supreme Court leak at the time, the Dobbs decision, which is what eventually ended up overturning Roe versus Wade, and then the pipe bombs. You might remember that were planted outside both the Democratic National Committee and the Republican National Committee, their headquarters here in Washington on the night before January 6th, 2021. With me now, Tracy Walder, former FBI special agent, former CIA officer, NewsNation contributor, best title in the business, as I like to say, and Jesse Weber, as well, is a NewsNation legal contributor. Jesse, Tracy, thank you first off for being here. Let me start with you, Tracy. So obviously the cocaine in the White House was a huge story, right? And now they're talking about reopening the case. From an investigative perspective, are they going to find anything?
In regards to the cocaine in the White House, so that was mostly investigated, obviously, by the Secret Service. They would have jurisdiction over that. My guess is they will not find much from an FBI perspective. I think they're going to find more bringing the FBI in regards to the Dobbs case, as well as the pipe bombs that ultimately and thankfully didn't go off, because the FBI really wasn't brought in to investigate those 2, and they have different resources that probably could have been helpful.
I'll get to the other 2 cases in a second. Tracy, why don't you think that they're going to find anything on the White House case? I mean, there's cameras all over the place. That was one of the big questions at the time.
I think the reality is the FBI can only do so much, right, in terms of investigating cases. And there's only so many agents and so many things that they're ultimately assigned to. And so I think in the case of the cocaine, in terms of public interest, public safety, as well as public corruption, quite frankly, it's not at the top of the list in terms of things that they are going to investigate. Now, there are cameras. You're absolutely right. And so that would be easy to identify someone. But if the case has already essentially been closed by the Secret Service, I don't know what else they're going to find.
All right. Here was Congressman Langworthy at the time telling me when I asked him, what do you think's going on here? Watch. You think that the Secret Service is trying to protect the Bidens here?
Well, I think that they certainly answer to the administration, and the administration wants this story to go away. As one of your panelists mentioned, the story has changed as to where the cocaine was found, and the timeline has changed along the way. There's only so many people that have access to these spaces.
Jesse, are you with Tracy here?
Okay, so here's the thing. Let's be very clear about something. These are all very serious, and this isn't a case where we say someone didn't commit a crime. No, there's evidence of a crime. You want to talk about the theft of government property, drug possession, possession of an explosive device, particularly in this kind of area. There's no doubt about that. But what you're seeing is, and what I think you're reading through the lines is, we're going to look into it now because it either was an insufficient investigation, it was not a thorough investigation, was there a cover-up? I mean, that's the difficulty here, because even with the Supreme Court leak, you're talking about an 8-month investigation. There were no fingerprints. There was no DNA that was properly extracted. With the leak, the 8-month, the cocaine was 11 days, and then Supreme Court was an 8-month investigation. People deserve answers. It just becomes a question of usually you talk about announcing a new investigation when there's some new evidence, someone has come forward. FBI doesn't have to announce that they're going to be reopening it. So that is why people look at it and say, is this politically motivated? Right. Is it fun just to look at the other side, or is there really something here?
You think that's because they're getting heat from conservatives as it relates to the Epstein files? And so now there's a let's focus on this stuff?
That becomes a question dedicating resources to this and why it hasn't been released. And are you taking resources away from something that it should be looked at? But look, this is all the idea of full transparency, transparency. Even people who don't like Donald Trump can also say releasing all the JFK files in an effort of transparency, that's a good thing. But because we're stonewalled with Epstein, now it's a question of what else can we look into. It's not the wrong thing because these are very serious incidents and there was crime committed. But what do we do from it?
Tracy, on the Supreme Court case, which was the Dobbs decision was leaked, Jesse, right, like a few weeks or a month or so before the eventual decision came out. And there was a Supreme Court investigation, or their investigators were put on it. Now, Tracy, when you bring the FBI potentially into this, does that sort of open any new doors, possibly, given what you know of the agency, or no?
My hope is actually yes. I actually feel pretty confident, to be completely honest with you, about that. And, to Jesse's point, this really is about transparency. But I look at all of these three cases that they're discussing in terms of threat and what that means to the American public, right, in terms of importance. And when something like this comes out with, I think, the intention to influence an outcome that someone didn't agree with, that is very, very problematic, right? And I think that's a public corruption issue. And so I think in terms of cyber and cell phone data, I do think that the FBI can really bring in some tools that maybe the Secret Service wasn't able to do at that point in time. You also have to keep in mind the Secret Service was also quite busy, unfortunately, in regards to the assassination attempts against, at that time, former President Trump, but now current President Trump. And so I really do think that this could shed some new light into this case.
It strikes me when you say cyber and phones, that would potentially be going down a road of some very important people, Tracy, and whether or not how any of that would work.
I mean, you're right. But the reality is, as Jesse mentioned before, a crime was committed. This information was leaked. And so it would be well within their purview to obviously be able to obtain warrants for the cell phones and for these computers.
All right. So when you take an across-the-board view here, you got three high-profile cases, the cocaine at the White House, the leak of the Dobbs draft, and then the pipe bombs that were found at both the DNC and RNC headquarters. Obviously, three different stories in their own right. But Jesse, you believe that it's worth the time, it's worth the manpower, the resources to look into all this at this point in time?
It might be, since there were no arrests. I mean, these are very serious situations. Talk about a national security threat with an illicit substance being brought into the White House. What happens if it wasn't cocaine? Someone leaking a government record like a Supreme Court decision, particularly one that's going to have an impact on the entire country. This is a problem. Pipe bombs, I don't even have to get in there. So I think there's something to the idea of dedicating resources. I think it does become a question how much you dedicate and what is the end conclusion. Is there going to be a report that's filed? Are there going to be charges referred to Jeanine Pirro? I mean, that becomes the question of where we're moving next with this.
Tracy, I'll give you the last word here.
I absolutely think that all three of these are worth investigating. As Jesse mentioned, that is a huge security breach at the White House. And I want to know who did that and how that happened. So a damage assessment can essentially be done. So I think that these are relevant cases to look at. I have no qualms about that. But again, we don't want to overextend resources because we also have other issues that the FBI needs to be looking into.
Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor. Give me the name of your podcast. It's one of the biggest in the country right now.
Sidebar, Tracy was on. I got to get you on it, Blake. That's the next one.
I'd love to come on. Is that an invite?
It's always an invite.
Always an invite. I'll take you up on it. Tracy Walters is now a Netflix star as well. Both of them, NewsNation contributor, and I always appreciate their time. Tracy, Jesse, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You got it. All right, still to come tonight here on The Hill. Did King Charles, yes, we're talking about King Charles, did he send a message to the president today?
As the anthem reminds us, the true North is indeed strong and free.
The King now saying Canada is strong and free, as you hear there, as the president, Trump, threatens tariffs for our neighbor to the north, maybe even a 51st state, and brand new reaction from the president today, just moments ago, on the other side of the break. On NewsNation, two different world leaders, for sure, taking on President Trump today in two very different ways. President Trump reportedly weighing ideas of potential sanctions against Russia following Vladimir Putin's latest attacks on Ukraine. But it's also, you could say, a war of words between the world leaders as well.
I don't like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit. He's killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it.
President Trump calling Putin, quote, crazy over the weekend. And following that up with this post today, what Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. He's playing with fire. That followed Putin calling Trump, quote, emotional after the president unloaded on the Russian president. And then, didn't think we'd be talking about this today, but here we are. There's King Charles, representing one of our oldest allies, the king currently visiting Canada, where he delivered a speech which many viewed as a response to President Trump's references to Canada as the, quote, 51st state.
Today, Canada faces another critical moment. Democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination, and freedom are values which Canadians hold dear, and ones which the government is determined to protect.
Full panel here with me now, and how about this group today? Hogan Gidley, former Principal Deputy Press Secretary in the first Trump White House. Lindsey Granger, NewsNation contributor. Welcome back, Ashley Davis. Haven't seen her in a while. Former official in the George W. Bush White House. And Dan Cannonen, former Battleground States Director for the Biden and Harris campaigns. Hello to you all. Nice to have you all in. Thanks for being here. The one thing Mick Mulvaney has said on this show quite frequently is the one thing that really hasn't gone to plan for Trump is Russia, Ukraine, and Putin. And now it's gotten to this point, Ashley. Where does it go from here?
Well, first of all, I think he's super frustrated. Trump, absolutely. And at the end of the day, I think that he really does not want more people to die, and he doesn't want to be fighting the war. But I think that because he wasn't able to control Putin as much as he thought he would, he's getting really angry, and I think it will continue. My biggest thing that I'm watching is that Congress is out this week. The Senate, Lindsey Graham has this package of, new things that he could put on Russia in regards to, various sanctions and everything else. But there's actually a little bit more to that. Does that happen when he comes back? When we come back next week in regards to the Senate?
You think he's teeing Trump up a little bit here?
No, Lindsey Graham's waiting. He's like, Trump, you tell me if you don't think that Putin's going, let me know when I can go.
Got it.
Ashley's right. I think Trump's very frustrated. This is one of the day one, we're going to fix it right away accomplishments he wanted to have in this administration. Is proving very difficult. And I think part of the problem is that he's not really understood the leverage he has or does not have with Russia. The economic sanctions, the other sanctions that may come into play that Graham is talking about, I think are going to be problematic because at the end of the day, the thing that Trump can really do for Russia is to ease some of the big sanctions on banking, on Western technology. That's going to really annoy some of the Russia hawks in the Congress. So at the same time, he's trying to get the big, beautiful bill passed. This is a complication. I think it's difficult for him to manage.
So you think he has the cards, he's just not playing them right?
Well, to a degree. I think there are some cards he could be playing. One of them, by the way, would be not praising Vladimir Putin every step of the way and then acting surprised when he doesn't give you everything he wants, while at the same time you're making Vladimir Zelensky look like a dictator in your rhetoric. He's got to come back to a place of a rational plan, and much like the tariff problem, Blake, there is no real articulated plan for how to deal with this war, except he wants it to end. That's not a plan.
I mean, Putin is essentially mocking Trump at this point. I think after a 2-hour phone conversation where we were led to believe that it was successful and there was going to be an imminent conversation about solving this, and then to berate and bombard Ukraine with bombs right after that shows a lack of respect.
Is he mocking Trump, or is it mocking the U.S. because this happened for years under the previous administration's watch? They couldn't do anything about it. The current one's trying to fix it. They can't do anything about it.
Well, I think that the bluff has been exposed. If you say 53 times on the campaign trail that, yes, we're going to solve this in 24 hours, even if it's an exaggeration, something has to be done. I think the next step is to create a stalemate. The U.S. and Europe have to continue to fund Ukraine and not hold up the $3 billion that's already been approved to provide a stalemate for Russia to make them actually come to the table. Because I don't think giving them illegally annexed Crimea is a solution. I don't think giving them 20% of Ukraine is a solution, because our European allies don't want that. So what position will we be in if we say yes to everything Russia wants?
You used to speak for Donald Trump. How do you view all of this right now? Where do you think the president is, and where do you think he goes from here?
First of all, this is obviously a problem of Joe Biden's making. We know when Biden was very clear that a minor incursion would be just fine with him in the United States. And once it happened, there was no conversation about an off-ramp. There was no diplomacy going on. It just kind of festered for quite some time. Trump comes in and says, I got to try and fix this. He had a good relationship with Vladimir Putin the first time, actually a good relationship with Volodymyr Zelensky as well. Trying to bring these two literally warring factions together is difficult. We all know on this panel, foreign policy is very nuanced. It's very, difficult to try and navigate. And when you have someone like Vladimir Zelensky, who has, put up a valiant effort against Vladimir Putin, no question. But now Putin wants what he got in this war. He wants to keep the territory he had. And the negotiation continues. And Trump did bring them both to the table, at least to some degree, although clunky to say the least. Right. What moves forward is going to be up to really
what's the runway here for Trump? Because the very first thing that you said was it's Biden's fault. And it did happen under the Biden administration. But at the end of the day, this is the American president trying to fix something. And he did say it would end on day one. It hasn't. He said it was in jest. Here we are. What's the runway here for Trump?
Look, I think a lot of things that have been mentioned already should be on the table. These sanctions will absolutely cripple Russia. The fact that we want to open up drilling in our country and make other nations rely on us for oil and gas, energy, et cetera, takes them away from Russia as well. Putting them kind of as an international pariah is very important, I think, into this process. But right now, it doesn't look like Putin's ready to budge at all.
On Canada, we heard from King Charles today. He was in Canada, of all people. And I think Donald Trump, the president, might have seen what was going on, maybe. Here's what he just posted. He said, I told Canada, which very much wants to be part of our fabulous Golden Dome system, that it will cost $61 billion if they remain a separate but equal nation, but will cost zero if they become our cherished 51st state. They are considering the offer, Ashley.
So just one thing I want to say, 80 co-sponsors in the Senate to do the sanctions, but there's no way they're giving more money to Ukraine. So I just want to close that. But let's talk about Canada. One, we have Alberta that has started the process of actually having the referendum to leave the country. Do I think that Canada is going to be the 51st state? No, but you see these sanctions, you see the country divided, especially in the west of Canada, against, Ontario and others because of what happened with Trudeau. I think that the president is giving Carney, at least, enough of a leeway right now, even though he's not beloved, that they strike a deal. But you have people, literally, like Alberta's going to have a referendum that their premier started to leave the country. Where will they go? Who knows?
Here was the headline from the BBC. King's Canadian speech doesn't mention you-know-who. So he tried to walk a very fine line here.
The timing was very interesting. I think it's like our blind allegiance to the U.S. and this partnership that we have longstanding is no longer the way it is. We're looking at other foreign alliances because it seems like we're getting kind of threats, kind of not. We don't know. Like perhaps you want to. Well, you did bring Carney into the Oval Office, and that meeting was much more tame than the Ukraine meeting, like we talked about earlier. But I think that the constant conversation about tariffs and not knowing exactly what Trump will do next is making one of our top allies uncomfortable.
What was the king trying to do here?
Well, I think he's trying to reassure and maybe stiffen the spine of Canada in this moment, and they have been pretty stiff. And Carney's in office because of Donald Trump, largely at this point, so probably wants to thank him for that. But back to the point that we made, Kimberly, about the alliances here. I mean, he's undercutting Canada, undercutting the UK and the EU, undercutting Zelensky, and until today, when he's been annoyed about Putin's intransience, has been praising Vladimir Putin. And your point is well taken, Ashley. They're not going to give any more money to Ukraine, which means they're not going to give any more money to stop the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is what Vladimir Putin wants. He's already giving Putin what he wants in this moment while he undercuts Canada and our allies.
I got to run, but I want to hear from your perspective. What's Trump doing here?
I don't think he's undercutting these other nations. I think he's trying to reset the order where the American people and the American manufacturers and the American businesses are first. That's what he talked about on the campaign trail. He did it the first time around as well, so no one should be shocked or surprised by any of this.
All right. Thank y'all. Appreciate it. Yeah. Can you all come back and we'll do it again tomorrow? Check your schedules. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Still to come tonight here on the Hill, the road to Mars. Does it begin in Starbase, Texas? I think that might be a live look. They are sending that big thing up into space in about 30 minutes' time. My take on the other side of the break. You can watch the launch live, by the way, on Elizabeth Vargas Reports coming up at 7. This is the Falcon 9, the big rocket that they're sending back up. Elon is. My take, other side of the break when the Hill returns, and that video.
Tonight, a bombshell NewsNation exclusive. President Biden's big secret with American farmers caught in the crosshairs.
It's discriminatory, it's unethical.
Brian Enton and the whistleblower every network wanted, but he's only talking to NewsNation. Tonight at 7/6 Central.
Now, and would you look at this? These are live pictures of Starbase, Texas. I've been watching this video for basically the whole commercial break because it is a stunning view there when you see the ocean in the background or the Gulf in the background. That is
the Starship spacecraft from SpaceX, which is about to take off in less than a half hour for its 9th ever test flight. And those are the anchors who were talking about it. This is being closely watched because, well, watching these is absolutely amazing. Keep in mind, this is like launching something the size of the Statue of Liberty out into space. But secondly, the last 2 launches didn't really go according to plan, as they experienced different kinds of explosions at different points along their journeys. In early March, for example, during the 8th Starship mission, the failure, quote unquote, actually caused some travel headaches as local airports temporarily had to halt flights due to the falling debris. And the Elon Musk haters, you probably remember what that was like. They would dunk on him as a result. That's a bit ridiculous, really, given what he and his SpaceX team are trying to accomplish, with all of us getting to witness in real time what's happening. Imagine if your work setbacks, for example, were broadcast for anyone to see, critique, and criticize. But think about the moment that we are in right now, because when it comes to space, earlier this month, NASA's Mars rover snapped a selfie of itself on the red planet and sent the images back to us Earthlings. If that doesn't make you wonder about what is possible when it comes to testing boundaries, then I don't know what does. So when it comes to SpaceX and the 9th Starship mission, whether it's successful, whether it's delayed tonight, who knows, even if it's another quote-unquote failure, there will be plenty to learn and plenty to leave us wondering what might come next. And that's my take tonight. I thank you so much for watching us here on The Hill. I am Blake Berman. We leave you with these amazing images